Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. Captain James Reed stood at the viewport of the Galactic Council station, watching the massive alien ships maneuver in perfect formation. Each vessel represented one of the 12 species that made up the Council. Sleek, powerful, and intimidating, humanity's own ship, the Endeavour, looked like a child's toy in comparison, docked at the farthest berth as if to emphasize its insignificance. Enjoying the view, human, the voice behind him was smooth but carried an unmistakable tone of superiority. Reed turned to face Ambassador Krellel of the Vex, a tall, blue-skinned being with 4 arms and eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. The Vex were known for their computational brilliance and military precision. "I am Ambassador. Your fleet movements are impressive," Reed replied with practiced diplomacy. He had been selected for this mission precisely because of his ability to swallow his pride. Krellel made a sound that might have been a laugh. "This is merely the arrival ceremony. The real demonstrations begin tomorrow when the war games start. You are fortunate to be allowed to observe it all." "Earth appreciates the invitation." "It was not my idea," Krellel said, 2 of his 4 hands adjusting his formal robes. "Some council members thought it would be educational for your species to see how real military powers conduct themselves." After Krellel departed, Reed exhaled slowly. 6 months of diplomatic training had prepared him for these subtle insults. Earth had only achieved faster-than-light travel 15 years ago, making humans the newest and least advanced species in known space. Being invited to observe the annual Galactic War Games was meant as a courtesy, or perhaps as a reminder of humanity's place in the cosmic hierarchy. Reed's quarters were small but functional. He activated his secure terminal and recorded his daily report. Day 1 at Council Station Epsilon, the other observers continued to treat Earth's presence as a novelty. My status remains purely observational with no input privileges for the simulation. He paused. "General Miller, I know you hoped for more, but these species have been conducting space warfare for thousands of years. They see us as children." Reed's mind drifted to his time commanding troops during the resource wars back on Earth. He had earned his reputation by understanding how terrain and psychology could overcome technological advantages. Those skills had made him valuable on Earth, but meant nothing here among civilizations that had mastered the stars before humans had invented the wheel. The next morning, Reed reported to the simulation chamber, an enormous room dominated by a 3-dimensional projection of a star system. The other military observers, 12 in total, 1 from each council species, were already seated at curved consoles surrounding the display. Admiral Gar, a massive reptilian being with scarred scales and sharp eyes, addressed the room. "The 87th Annual War Games will now commence. As tradition dictates, we simulate conflict to prevent it in reality." His gaze swept across the observers before briefly pausing at Reed. "Some of you will participate, others will merely watch and learn." Reed was directed to a small desk behind the main circle, reinforcing his status as an outsider. From there, he could see the displays but could not interact with the simulation. The parameters of the exercise appeared in the air. 2 equally matched fleets would compete for control of a resource-rich system with complex gravitational features. The simulation would test not just tactical acumen but strategic thinking and resource management. As the alien observers began programming their fleet movements and discussing potential strategies, Reed noticed something odd about the simulation parameters. The gravitational data for the system's 3rd planet seemed inconsistent with the listed mass. He frowned, running calculations in his head. If the simulation ran as currently configured, the results would be significantly skewed. Ships passing near that planet would experience incorrect gravitational effects, potentially giving one side an unfair advantage. Reed hesitated. He had been explicitly instructed not to interfere, just watch, learn, and report back to Earth. Making himself noticed could create a diplomatic incident, yet allowing a flawed simulation seemed wrong. After several minutes of internal debate, Reed stood up and approached Admiral Gar. "Excuse me, Admiral," Reed said quietly. The reptilian commander turned with surprise. "Yes, human, you should be at your observation station." "I believe there's an error in the simulation parameters," Reed said. "The gravitational constant for the 3rd planet doesn't match its listed mass. It would create artificial anomalies in fleet movements." The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward the human who had dared to speak. Admiral Gar's inner eyelids blinked slowly. "Show me." Reed approached the main display, painfully aware of the stares from the other observers. He pointed out the discrepancy, explaining the potential impact on the simulation results. After a moment, one of the technical operators confirmed his observation. The human is correct. There is a 0.37% variance in the gravitational calculations. Ambassador Krell stepped forward from an observation gallery above. How interesting that a representative from such a young species would notice what our experts missed. His tone made it clear this was not a compliment. Another observer, a stocky rust-colored alien named Tom, spoke up. Perhaps fresh eyes have value, Krell. Let us correct the error and proceed. Reed returned to his station, uncomfortably aware that he had drawn attention to himself. While the technical team recalibrated the simulation, he noticed several observers studying him with new interest. Admiral Gar approached Reed's station. "Your attention to detail is unexpected," he said quietly. "These simulations matter more than you know, human. They establish doctrine and influence real defense allocations." "I only want the exercise to be fair, Admiral," Reed replied. Fair? Gar made a rumbling sound in his chest. An interesting concept from a species that still fights itself over resources and ideology. Before Reed could respond, the lights dimmed and the star system projection reactivated with corrected parameters. The war games were about to begin. The simulated fleets took their starting positions. Reed couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. The other observers were taking this exercise with extraordinary seriousness, more than seemed warranted for a mere training simulation. When the first virtual shots were fired, Reed leaned forward in his chair. Despite his limited status, he was determined to understand every aspect of these games. Earth's future might depend on what he learned here, watching advanced civilizations wage their simulated wars. What Reed didn't yet realize was that his small intervention had already altered the course of events more than anyone could have predicted. The simulation unfolded with mesmerizing precision. Holographic ships darted between planets and asteroids, their movements coordinated with a level of tactical sophistication that made Reed's military training seem primitive by comparison. Yet something felt off about the whole exercise. Reed watched as the 12 alien observers split into two teams. The Blue Force was led by Admiral Gar and included Tom, the rust-colored alien who had supported Reed earlier. The Red Force included Ambassador Krell and several observers from species known for their aggressive expansion policies. "Interesting matchup," a voice said beside Reed. He turned to find a small green alien with large compound eyes. Reed recognized her as Mira, the technical specialist who had verified his gravitational calculation. "Does the team composition mean something?" Reed asked quietly. Mira's eyes shifted color slightly. "Everything in council politics means something human," she lowered her voice. "Those teams represent the two major power blocks in our shared space. These games, they influence real resource allocation and defense priorities." Before Reed could ask more questions, a loud alarm blared through the chamber. The simulation froze and Admiral Gar stood up with obvious frustration. "Technical malfunction in Sector 7, announced the system. "Recalibration required." As the technical team worked to fix the problem, Reed noticed the observers breaking into small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Several glanced his way with expressions he couldn't read on their alien faces. Tom approached Reed's station. Up close, Reed could see that what he had thought was rust-colored skin was actually a complex pattern of small scales. Two dark eyes studied him intently. "Your feedback on the gravitational anomaly was helpful," Tom said. "Perhaps you have insights on other aspects of the simulation." Reed hesitated. "I'm only here to observe." "Yes, that's what they all say." Tom's mouth formed what might have been a smile. "But I've studied your species. Humans rarely just watch, do they?" Before Reed could respond, Admiral Gar called the room to order. "The technical issues persist. We will take a 1-hour recess while the systems are recalibrated." As the observers filed out, Ambassador Krell blocked Reed's path. "Quite fortunate that you spotted that small error, human, almost as if you were looking for flaws in our system." "I was just being thorough," Reed replied evenly. Indeed, Krell's forearms moved in a pattern that Reed's cultural training identified as skepticism. "Your species has a reputation for unpredictability. Some find it concerning." After Krell departed, Reed found himself alone in the corridor with Tom. "Don't mind Krell," Tom said. "The Vex have always been uncomfortable with variables they cannot calculate. Humans represent too many unknowns." Reed nodded. "We're still figuring ourselves out, to be honest." "Perhaps that's your strength." Tom gestured toward a viewing platform. "Join me." The platform offered a spectacular view of the station's central hub, where representatives from dozens of species mingled. Reed had spent weeks studying the major council races, but many of these beings were completely unknown to him. "The council is debating your role here," Tom said without preamble. Reed turned in surprise. "My role, I'm just an observer. After your intervention this morning, several members suggested you might offer a fresh perspective." Tom's scales shifted slightly, darkening. "Others fear that perspective." "Why would anyone fear human input? Our technology is centuries behind yours." Tom made a low clicking sound. "Technology is not the only measure of advancement, Captain Reed. Some species here developed quantum computing before they developed ethics." Reed considered this. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "The simulations will resume shortly with some modifications. The Council has voted to grant you Observer Plus status." "What does that mean?" "You may offer limited input during specific phases," Tom explained. "Nothing that directly affects tactical decisions, but you can suggest changes to scenario parameters." Reed felt a surge of excitement. This was far more than he had expected to achieve. "Thank you for advocating for me." "Don't thank me yet," Tom replied. Krell and his allies agreed only because they believe human input will be either irrelevant or embarrassingly primitive. "And what do you believe?" Tom's scales rippled. "I believe in seeing all variables before making calculations." When they returned to the simulation chamber, Reed found his station had been upgraded. A small interface now allowed him limited access to the simulation data. Still far less than the full observers had, but significantly more than before. Admiral Gar addressed the room. "The technical issues have been resolved. Additionally, by council vote, the human observer has been granted modified participation privileges for research purposes." Several observers looked displeased, but none openly objected as the simulation restarted. Reed dove into the historical data now available to him. He reviewed the outcomes of previous war games looking for patterns. What he found was troubling. Over the past decade, the Red Force had won 73% of the simulations. That level of imbalance seemed statistically improbable in what should be balanced scenarios. Either the Red Force was significantly more skilled, or something else was influencing the outcomes. Reed focused on the simulation parameters themselves. Each year, the Council rotated responsibility for designing the core scenario. This year's parameters had been set by a species aligned with Krell's faction. "You see it, don't you?" Tom had approached silently. Reed looked up. "The winning percentage is skewed heavily toward one faction." "Yes, and those who control the simulation parameters tend to enjoy beneficial outcomes." Tom's voice was barely above a whisper. "Some of us have noticed this pattern but lacked sufficient evidence to formally challenge it." Before Reed could respond, the main simulation accelerated. Both forces had deployed their fleets and the first engagements were beginning. On the main display, Red Force ships moved with remarkable efficiency, exploiting what appeared to be random fluctuations in sensor capabilities to ambush Blue Force vessels. Reed studied the data and frowned. The sensor fluctuations didn't appear random at all. They followed a subtle pattern that directly benefited Red Force positioning. He had a choice to make. Pointing out another flaw would certainly antagonize Krell and possibly jeopardize Earth's standing. Staying silent would be safer diplomatically but would allow an unfair advantage to persist. Reed thought of his mission briefing: observe, learn, don't make waves. The safe choice was clear. Instead, he activated his newly granted interface privileges and highlighted the sensor pattern, adding a brief annotation about its statistical improbability. He sent the data to Admiral Gar's station. The reaction was immediate. Gar stood up, his massive frame tense. "Simulation pause, I call for parameter verification." All eyes turned to Reed, who met their gaze steadily. He had made his choice. Whatever happened next would shape not just his mission but potentially humanity's place among the stars. The council chamber erupted into heated discussions as the implications of Reed's discovery began to sink in. He had just challenged the integrity of a tradition central to galactic politics, and he was only human. The emergency council session lasted 5 hours. Reed waited outside the chamber alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that he had overstepped his boundaries. Through the massive doors, he occasionally heard raised voices, though the station's sophisticated sound dampening prevented him from making out specific words. When the doors finally opened, Admiral Gar emerged first, his reptilian features unreadable. Behind him came Ambassador Krell, all forearms rigid with what Reed interpreted as anger. "Captain Reed," Gar rumbled, "the Council has reached a decision." Reed stood at attention, bracing himself for dismissal from the station. "The simulation parameters have been reset and independently verified by representatives from 3 neutral species," Gar continued. "Your observation regarding the sensor anomalies was accurate." Ambassador Krell stepped forward. "Though your methods were inappropriate, human, the Council acknowledges the validity of your concern." His words seemed physically painful to deliver. Tom appeared at Gar's side, scales flushed with an orange tint that Reed hadn't seen before. "The Council has voted. In light of these developments, you are being offered a position." Reed blinked in surprise. "What kind of position?" "Tactical advisor to Blue Force," Gar said, "with limited but direct input capabilities." Krell's eyes narrowed. "Some of us feel this is premature and potentially destabilizing. Humans have no experience with interstellar combat scenarios." "Perhaps that's exactly what we need," Tom countered. "A perspective unconstrained by centuries of doctrine." Reed understood the significance of this moment. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was humanity's first real opportunity to demonstrate value to the Galactic Council. "I accept the position," Reed said firmly. "Thank you for the opportunity." As they re-entered the simulation chamber, Reed noticed the atmosphere had changed. The other observers studied him with new intensity, some with curiosity, others with undisguised suspicion. He had been elevated from irrelevant spectator to active participant in a single day. His new station was positioned within the Blue Force command circle. The interface before him was more complex, though still limited compared to the full Council observers. "The reset simulation will begin in 5 minutes," announced the system. "Tactical advisors, prepare your initial assessments." Tom approached as Reed familiarized himself with the new controls. "You've created quite the situation, human." "That wasn't my intention," Reed replied. "Intentions matter less than actions here." Tom's scales had returned to their normal rust color. "Krell's faction is embarrassed. They will be watching for any mistake you make." "No pressure then." Tom made the clicking sound that Reed now recognized as laughter. "Indeed. But know this, you've already proven more valuable than expected. Don't waste the opportunity." The simulation reactivated with the new verified parameters. Both forces began deploying their fleets according to traditional doctrines. Reed observed the opening moves carefully, noting how each species favored certain tactical patterns. The Blue Force commander, a tall avian being named Lark, organized their fleet into a classic defensive formation. Red Force responded with a dispersed approach, spreading their assets across multiple vectors. Reed studied the battlefield, recognizing elements from Earth's military history. Despite the advanced technology, the basic principles of space combat seemed remarkably similar to naval warfare. Controlling choke points, maintaining supply lines, and positioning for advantage. After 20 minutes of conventional maneuvering, Reed noticed a potential opportunity. Red Force had committed to a 3-pronged attack, leaving their central coordination somewhat exposed. It wasn't a glaring weakness, but with the right approach, he hesitated. His role was advisory, not command, suggesting an unorthodox tactic might be seen as overstepping again, yet this was exactly why he had been included for a fresh perspective. After briefly considering his options, Reed activated his communication channel. "Commander Lark, I've observed a potential opportunity in Sector 4, he said carefully. "Red Force has optimized for efficiency rather than redundancy. Their command and control pathways have minimal overlap." Lark turned, her feathered crest rising slightly. "Explain." Reed highlighted the relevant section of the battlefield. "On Earth, we developed a tactic called communication node isolation. Rather than attacking enemy vessels directly, we target their ability to coordinate." The other Blue Force advisors exchanged glances. Such an approach wasn't unknown in galactic warfare, but it was rarely prioritized over direct engagement. "You suggest we ignore their frontline assets?" Lark asked. "Not ignore, distract," Reed clarified. "A minimal force to hold their attention while we commit our main strength to disrupt their communication network here and here." He marked 2 points on the display. Tom studied the proposal. It could work, but the timing would need to be precise. We'd be vulnerable during the repositioning. "That's why Red Force wouldn't expect it," Reed said. "They're counting on us to follow conventional doctrine. Lark considered for a moment. We will modify our approach, prepare the distraction force. The next 30 minutes transformed the simulation. Blue Force's unexpected tactic initially appeared to leave them vulnerable, drawing concerned murmurs from some observers. Red Force pressed what they perceived as an advantage, committing additional resources to their frontal assault. Then Blue Force sprung the trap. A concentrated attack on Red Force's communication nodes created cascading coordination problems throughout their fleet. Individual Red Force vessels continued fighting effectively, but their actions became increasingly uncoordinated. Ambassador Krell stood up abruptly. Point of order, this tactic was not part of standard council doctrine. Admiral Gar's inner eyelids blinked slowly. There is no regulation requiring adherence to standard doctrine, Ambassador. Innovation is permitted. Within the Blue Force command circle, Reed received approving nods from several alien advisors. Tom's scales had taken on a bright copper hue. A human tactic, Tom said quietly. Simple but effective, focusing on connections rather than nodes themselves. As the simulation continued, Red Force struggled to adapt. Their technological superiority became less relevant as their coordination deteriorated. Blue Force pressed their advantage methodically, containing then neutralizing isolated enemy groups. When the simulation ended 2 hours later, Blue Force had achieved a decisive victory. The chamber fell silent as the final statistics displayed overhead, the most lopsided outcome in 15 years of war games. Admiral Gar approached the center of the room. The simulation is complete. Blue Force victory is confirmed. Reed expected celebration from his team, but the alien observers remained formal, simply acknowledging the outcome with professional nods. Only Tom showed any emotion, his scales rippling with what Reed hoped was satisfaction. As the observers began filing out for the mandatory post-simulation analysis, Ambassador Krell intercepted Reed. An interesting approach, human, Krell said, his forearms moving in complex patterns. Some might consider it dishonorable to avoid direct confrontation. In human military history, we learned that victory with minimal casualties is the most honorable outcome possible, Reed replied. Indeed, Krell's eyes narrowed. And what else might humans teach us about warfare? Before Reed could answer, Admiral Gar called for his attention. Captain Reed, your presence is requested at an emergency council session. Emergency session? Reed asked, suddenly concerned. Did I violate a protocol? Gar's expression remained unreadable. No, but your intervention today has accelerated certain discussions. The council must decide how to proceed. As Reed followed Gar toward the council chambers, he noticed the station's security level had increased. Armed guards stood at intersections where none had been before. Admiral, Reed said quietly, what's really happening here? Gar slowed his pace. Captain Reed, these war games are not merely theoretical exercises. What you learn today will change everything for you, for Earth, and possibly for the entire council. Reed felt a chill run down his spine as the massive council doors opened before them. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to being just an observer. The full Galactic Council chamber was unlike anything Reed had seen before. 12 massive seats arranged in a perfect circle, each designed for the unique physiology of its occupant. Above them, a dome of what appeared to be living crystal-shifted colors and patterns too complex for Reed to interpret. At the center stood a simple platform where speakers could address the assembled representatives. Reed found himself directed to this spot, feeling exposed and vulnerable under the collective gaze of the most powerful beings in known space. Admiral Gar took position at his council seat, his reptilian form dwarfing the ceremonial chair. The emergency session regarding simulation outcome 87 Delta is now in session. Captain James Reed of Earth will be permitted to hear council deliberations as mandated by Protocol 14. A tall, willowy being with silvery skin stood. Reed recognized her as High Counselor Vala of the Lumen, the current head of the council. Captain Reed, her voice was melodic yet carried an unmistakable authority. Your tactical contribution today has precipitated a situation we had not anticipated facing for at least another decade. Reed maintained his military posture. I'm not sure I understand, High Counselor. Of course you don't, Ambassador Krell interjected. That was by design. Vala raised a slender hand for silence. Captain Reed, when your species achieved faster-than-light travel, the Council faced a dilemma. Humanity's technological development was proceeding at an unprecedented rate, yet your political and social structures remained volatile. Tom's voice came from his seat to Reed's right. Some of us argued for immediate contact and integration, others advocated for quarantine and observation. The compromise, Vala continued, was limited engagement. Earth would be welcomed into the galactic community but kept at arm's length from certain realities. Reed felt a growing unease. What realities? Admiral Gar stood, his massive form commanding attention. The war games are not merely simulations, Captain Reed, they are preparation. Preparation for what? The crystal dome above darkened, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a star map of the galaxy with Council space clearly marked in blue. At the far edge of the map, a section of space glowed an ominous red. 17 years ago, our long-range sensors detected unusual activity at the galactic rim, Gar explained. Something is coming, Captain. Something that does not respond to communication attempts and has destroyed 3 unmanned research outposts. Reed studied the display, his military training immediately assessing strategic implications. An invasion force. We don't know, Vala said, but the Council has been preparing for worst-case scenarios. The annual war games are part of that preparation, testing different defensive strategies against various assault profiles. Tom's scales had darkened to a deep burgundy. Each year, we adjust the simulation parameters based on new data from the rim. This year's model reflected recent observations of their apparent attack patterns. The realization hit Reed like a physical blow. You've been hiding this from Earth, from all non-Council worlds. Krell's forearms moved in a pattern of acknowledgement. It was deemed necessary.